Next on Intimate Portrait. Barbara Taylor Bradford is one of the world's most successful authors. All 15 of her novels have been bestsellers, and most made into lavish television miniseries featuring movie stars like Liam Neeson, Anthony Hopkins, and Lindsay Wagner.
She never loses the grit and the humanity of the people she's writing about. There's such heart in her work.
Although Barbara became a millionaire with the publication of her first novel, A Woman of Substance, her life did not begin in wealth and luxury. She was born to a working-class family during the Depression on the cold moors of northern England.
When you're an only child living in the kind of place that she was brought up in, you would create stories in order to escape the bleak, dark part of the world you lived in.
Barbara relied upon her own skills and ambition to work her way to the top. At 16, she dropped out of high school to enter the tough world of journalism, where she honed her writing skills for nearly 30 years before making her mark on the literary world. Since her first novel, that mark has never dulled.
She has the ability to tell a great story and to totally manipulate people's emotions. So you know you're going to have a good cry, and you know that you're going to be kept turning the pages.
Please join me, Stephen Collins, for an intimate portrait of Barbara Taylor Bradford. Barbara Taylor was born in 1933 in the suburbs of Leeds, in the northern English county of Yorkshire. Although Leeds was an industrial city making woolen textiles, Barbara remembers Yorkshire idyllically, with rolling hills and pastoral dales.
It was very countrified, very rural in those days. It had a lot of fields, a lot of woods. It was in the center of a lot of greenery.
Steeped in the traditions of the moors, Barbara Taylor was a Yorkshire lass through and through. Her family had been in Yorkshire for centuries, and her grandfather was one of the great Scottish Seaforth Highlanders.
My mother was born Frida Walker, and she had 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and they were orphaned when my mother was 14 years old. So she became a trainee nurse at Ripon Fever Hospital, which is a children's hospital, and she trained to be a children's nurse. It was when she was working in Leeds that she met this tall, good-looking Yorkshireman. He was about 6'2", green eyes, black hair.
Barbara was the only child of Winston and Frida Taylor, although a son, Vivian, died of meningitis as an infant before Barbara was born.
And of course, she was the only one, so she was just the apple of their eye, you know.
As a child, Barbara was in awe of her handsome father. 20 years earlier, at the outset of World War I, Barbara's father, Winston, ran away to join the Royal Navy when he was still only 15. Late in the war, he would receive a life-threatening injury.
He got shrapnel in his calf, and slowly gangrene spread all the way up his leg. And it was my grandmother who said to him, "Winston, you must have your leg off, because the gangrene is spreading so rapidly that when it touches your heart, you'll be dead."
Like so many of her childhood experiences and memories, her father's artificial leg would one day become a part of Barbara's novels. As a child, however, she found nothing unusual about it.
Actually, very few people knew that his leg had been amputated. He was very proud. He walked with a slight limp and a walking stick. My father, I was a little in awe of and sometimes afraid of. When I was 14 and 15 and I'd been out with boys, he would say, "Well, bring him home, I want to see him." And I never did, because usually they got a grilling that embarrassed me, so I never wanted to do that.
Both her mother and father contributed uniquely to young Barbara, fostering in their child the interests and talents that would lead directly to her future success.
I think I inherited my father's storytelling ability, and he had a gift of creating suspense and holding the person listening spellbound. My mother loved Charles Dickens and, of course, read those books to me when I was growing up. I did read the whole of Dickens by the time I was 12 and 13 years old. She literally force-fed books to me, although I didn't know she was force-feeding books because I enjoyed it. She taught me to read when I was 4.
In addition to Charles Dickens, Barbara's great literary heroines were the Bronte sisters, Charlotte and Emily, who were born just a few miles from her within the same Yorkshire dales.
I visited the Bronte Museum many times in the village of Haworth, and my mother and I did walk many times to this ruined farm called Top Withens, which was the model for one of the greatest books in the English language, Wuthering Heights.
Her father's storytelling ability and her mother's devotion to books led Barbara to begin writing when she was only 7 years old. Foreshadowing her future success, she submitted a story to a children's magazine at the age of 10.
I had written a story about a little girl and her pony, the pony she'd always hoped to get, and finally she got one, which I didn't. My father was always saying he would buy me a pony, but I never did get one, but the little girl in the story did. And my mother read it and thought it was very well done and sent it to a children's magazine.
The magazine bought the story and paid the 10-year-old writer 10 shillings and sixpence, the equivalent of about $1.50.
When it appeared, I was very excited, and I said to my mother, "Mummy, I'm going to be a writer when I grow up. I'm going to write books."
Barbara was determined to start her writing career, and by the time she was 16, decided to leave school to pursue a career in journalism. Her parents, however, disagreed with her on the best path for her future.
They wanted her to stay on at school, but she had this writing she wanted to be, and so she wanted to get a job.
I said to my mother, "Well, I think I'm going to leave school now instead of staying for another 2 years." And she was horrified and said, "You can't leave school, you've got to stay until you're 18 and then you'll go to Leeds University."
One of Barbara's teachers at the Northcote Girls' School arranged for her to have a job interview at the Yorkshire Evening Post. Barbara pleaded with her mother to be able to go.
And my mother said, "Well, okay, you can go for the interview, but I'm going to go with you. I'm going to take you for the interview." I said, "I'll never get the job. You can't go to the interview with me, Mummy. I've got to go alone. I'm grown up." And at 16, I felt grown up, as all 16-year-olds do. Anyway, she relented and let me go on my own.
The interview was not exactly what Barbara had expected.
Now, this was not the news editor, as I at first thought when she told me this, but the woman who ran the typist pool. And when I came back smiling, she knew that I'd got the job as a typist, and again was very upset. And she said, "Well, we're going to give this job 2 weeks, and after that you're going to go back to school next term because you're not going to like this job." And to tell you the truth, I didn't. The first day was the worst day of my life.
With no secretarial skills to speak of, Barbara wasted so much paper on her first day she was afraid she would be fired. After a few weeks, though, her skills improved and she soon set her sights beyond the typist's pool.
One day I took a deep breath and decided to go and try and interview an old woman who lived near us called Polly. And the children called her Polly the Witch because she really was like a hermit and lived in an old cottage. Now, why is she worth a story? Because Barbara found out that she was the sister of one of the richest men in Leeds. And I just dropped it on the sub-editor's desk and walked away.
Barry Horniblow, the paper's editor, was so impressed with the gumption of the 16-year-old typist that within a few months he moved her to the reporter's room, where she met a young reporter named Keith Waterhouse.
When the newsroom, the city room, was empty at night, you would find Barbara clacking away on an ancient Remington typewriter.
Keith taught me about writing news copy. He also told me one day when I burst into tears, "You mustn't cry in the newsroom, Barbara, love. You've got to do that in the ladies' room when nobody sees you."
And when she was bawled out, she used to come and weep on my shoulder over at the coffee shop.
Within 2 years, there was an opening on the Yorkshire Evening Post as women's page editor, and Barbara was promoted to the position.
It was unheard of for a girl of 18 to be an executive on any newspaper at that time. It still is.
Despite her early success, Barbara Taylor's talents were bigger than Leeds, and she would soon have to leave home to pursue her goals.
Well, you knew Barbara was going places. There's no doubt about that. She was going to be famous.
This is an intimate portrait of Barbara Taylor Bradford. I'm Stephen Collins. In 1953, when she had been a reporter and women's page editor on the Yorkshire Evening Post for 4 years, 20-year-old Barbara Taylor began to feel the pull of the big city and set her ambitions anew on moving to London.
Why, in those days, Leeds is not the city then of what it is today. People wanted to go to London. That was the capital city. And they knew if they wanted to make the way in life, London was the place to be.
It was always my ambition to go to Fleet Street, which in those days was the centre of all of the newspapers. When anybody talks about the London papers, they say Fleet Street.
London was good and was very good for girls at that time. It was full employment, of course, everywhere. And girls were just beginning to get hold of some damned good jobs.
At 20, Barbara still lived at home, and moving to London would mean leaving her parents for the first time in her life.
The sad thing for me now, looking back, is I hadn't realised how it affected my parents and especially my mother. And I found her diary much later, many years later, after she died. And on the page that I'd gone to London, it said, "Barbara went to work in London today." And all of the sunshine has left my life.
Barbara visited her parents often as she made a new life and career for herself in London. Barbara's first job in London was as assistant fashion editor on the magazine Woman's Own. After only a few months as assistant fashion editor, there was an opening as editor of the fashion pages, and Barbara got the job.
She was young to land the job she did, I suppose. Yes, but Barbara had a very competent aura, and so it made perfect sense. I don't think anybody questioned it.
Barbara was a contributing writer to several London papers, including the London Evening News, London America, and Today magazine.
Newspapers just broadened my horizons in a way and made me see that I could do many things with my life.
In 1962, a man named Robert Bradford met a girlfriend of Barbara's in Los Angeles. Heading to London, Bob agreed to bring a message to Barbara. When he called, though, Barbara was out of town, and Bob met instead her neighbors, Jack and Dorothy Davis, who urged her to meet Bob on the Sunday she returned.
I said, "I can't. I have a deadline." And I really do have a deadline, Dorothy. It's got to be in on Monday morning, which is tomorrow. And she said, "Barbara, don't do this to us. You must come." And I said, "No, I can't. I'm sorry. Bye." Hang up.
I think she was very reluctant to meet me. Not because nothing to do with me. She just didn't want to be bothered meeting anybody.
10 minutes later, there is Dorothy on my doorstep. So I said, "Okay, I'm going to come like this." So she's looked at me and she said, "You're coming like this? Don't you want to put any makeup on?" I said, "I've got lipstick and a bit of eye. I'm fine." And she said, "You're going to regret this."
When I met Barbara the first time, she looked very attractive, little plump, you know. She wasn't dressed up. She was in a sweater and blue jeans, but with a beautiful smile.
So he sits down on a sofa where I'm sitting and starts to talk to me. And within about half an hour, I felt as if I'd known him all my life.
And somehow we seemed to be clicking. It seemed to be very strange for me because I was used to another type of girl.
So that at the first opportunity, I excused myself and I went out and I managed to do this to Dorothy, and she came out. I said, "Can I borrow all your makeup, please?" And she said, "I told you." So I quickly did a good makeup job. And Bob suddenly says to me halfway through the lunch, "What are you doing this afternoon?" I said, "Nothing." And Dorothy looks at me and says, and then at him and says, "What about your deadline, Barbara?" I said, "Oh, that's okay. I mean, I'll get up early tomorrow morning. It's fine."
Bob and Barbara were a couple immediately, and within the year began to think about marriage, although the actual decision to marry was a bit unconventional.
You know, one always thinks that of a proposal as being an actual statement of somebody saying, will you marry me, or let's get married. And I don't actually have any memory of Bob ever saying to me, will you marry me? It was more of when we're married.
It wasn't the kind of thing where I go on my knees and, give her the ring. I guess I just slipped it in conversation, and as a matter of fact, because I didn't know how she was going to react either.
I actually made 3 different dates for the wedding because Bob wasn't sure when he could conclude the business he was doing. The 3rd one was the 24th of December, and in fact, he had not arrived on the afternoon of the 23rd. But in fact, he did show up at my apartment at some ungodly hour, like 11:30 at night, with a bottle of Joy perfume and a wedding ring.
30-year-old Barbara Taylor married Robert Bradford on Christmas Eve, 1963. Now Barbara Taylor Bradford, she knew that marrying Bob would mean moving to the United States.
I'm sort of old-fashioned. I feel that if you're in love with a man and want to be with him, then you have to go where he goes. When we first got married, Bob and I really didn't talk about having children, but there came a point towards my middle 30s when I did say, shall we have a baby, do you want a baby? And he said, yes, why not? I did get pregnant and I had a miscarriage. I was saddened by that at that time, and so was he, and I didn't get pregnant again, and it's that simple. And I'm not one to go and see 2,000 doctors. And I wasn't going to put Bob through that.
During the early years of their marriage, Bob, a film producer, was very busy, traveling often between New York, Los Angeles, London, and Spain. While at home, Barbara began to think about how to start her career anew in the United States, and also began to feel the urge to write a novel, as she had decided to do in her youth.
When I came to America, one of the things that troubled me was that I would be not working, giving up my career in a sense, my career as a journalist with quite a well-known byline in England. And I didn't really, in a sense, know where to begin.
Banking on her background in fashion editing, Barbara began to write books on decorating. Her success in writing decorating books eventually led to a syndicated column called Designing Woman. That column would establish Barbara Taylor Bradford as one of the premier design columnists in America.
And that is what I was doing for the first 12 years I lived in America. I was writing my column 3 times a week for 185 papers and doing a number of decorating books, about 7 altogether. But I never lost sight of the fact that I wanted to write fiction.
All this time, she was always writing, trying to do a novel.
Between 1968-69 and the early 70s, I started but did not finish 4 novels. But I think that I got bored with them. And I know at the time I told myself, if you're bored, then the reader is going to be bored. And so I stopped, and I would put it away, and I took a yellow pad and a felt tip pen, and I said, what kind of book do you want to write? And then I wrote a saga. And I asked myself all these questions in my head. Where do you want to set it? What is it going to be about? What period of time? And what I came up with essentially was a traditional, old-fashioned saga set in England at the turn of the century, a story of a woman who makes it in a man's world when a woman was not doing that. And as I was answering all these questions on my yellow pad, I suddenly said to myself, I want to write a story about a woman who becomes a woman of substance. And I looked at the phrase, I remember it very well that Monday morning, and I thought, that is a wonderful title.
When I saw it originally, I thought, was almost overwhelming. But I said to her, look, I don't know how you're going to do this. This is a tremendous job. And she said, no, I'm going to do it. I want to do the story about this woman.
In less than a week, Barbara had given name to her character Emma Hart and created an outline for A Woman of Substance. Even she would be surprised by the unimaginable success her first novel would achieve. I'm Stephen Collins. Welcome back to an intimate portrait of Barbara Taylor Bradford. In 1976, Barbara Taylor Bradford showed the outline for A Woman of Substance to her agent in England, who quickly garnered the interest of the president of Doubleday Books, Betty Prancher.
And the next thing I knew, I was having a drink with Betty and an editor called Carolyn Blakemore, and they said, "We love this outline. Can we have the book? Can we have the pages?" And I said, "There are none. I haven't written it."
When she heard the publisher say, "We love it, we love the idea, give us more pages," she got to work around the clock.
3 months later, Barbara handed Doubleday 192 pages of A Woman of Substance, and the publisher bought the book. At the time, she had not yet grasped what a tremendous undertaking writing the saga would be.
Very late nights, very tense. A lot of paper went into the paper basket. A lot of tension. Days without food.
I discovered that I got up earlier and earlier, so that I was often getting up at 4:30 and 5 o'clock, because I wanted to put enough hours in and then to be able to have a rest at the end of the afternoon and then be ready to be a wife, to be with my husband.
Somehow she made it. She came through. It took her 2 years, 2 solid years.
The finished manuscript numbered 1,520 pages and weighed 16.5 pounds.
I felt that I'd given birth to a bouncing baby.
She handed me the manuscript. I mean, I just was flabbergasted. I was ready to fall over the chair.
The success of A Woman of Substance was virtually unparalleled for a first-time novelist. Doubleday was thrilled with the initial hardcover sales, but it would be the phenomenal 3.5 million paperback sales that would launch A Woman of Substance and Barbara Taylor Bradford to literary stardom. The book would remain atop the mass-market paperback bestseller list for more than a year.
In those days, we're talking 20 years ago, the book sold 55 or 60,000 copies in the hardback, which was amazing, you know. And subsequently, a year later, it's made history. It was something like 3 million in paperback. I mean, it was unbelievable.
And that's an extraordinary number coming off a book that sold 55,000 in hardcover. It showed that there was a tremendous audience out there.
My mother thought it was a little bit dry about business in the beginning, but of course when she got the finished product, my mother looked at me and said, "This is the fulfillment of your childhood dreams." And it was, because I'd finally written and published a novel.
More than simply a successful novel, A Woman of Substance has made an indelible mark on its readers worldwide, who found a role model in the stalwart Emma Hart, who rises from poverty to fortune.
And the chord that I struck was women being independent and being able to liberate themselves and go out into the world and do what they wanted to do as far as working and achieving things was concerned.
And it says, if you have a dream and if you work hard, you can do it. So it's the great American dream, really. But it's a universal dream, which is why A Woman of Substance all over the world has been huge.
The book has sold more than 18 million copies in 88 countries and nearly 40 different languages.
We sell her in Uzbekistan, we sell her in the former Soviet Union, we sell her in mainland China, in Taiwan, throughout Scandinavia, throughout the Middle East. The appeal seems to be universal.
Barbara Taylor Bradford became a millionaire with the publication of her first novel. The remarkable parallels in the lives of character and creator have caused many to speculate on the similarities and differences between Emma Hart and Barbara Taylor Bradford.
I wonder who Emma really is. Is Emma really Barbara Taylor Bradford?
Well, I think she drew on herself and then fictionalized of the character. Start with yourself, then write yourself out.
Emma she's definitely got Barbara's sense of humor, her sense of courage, her sense of commitment, her sense of justice, her fight, and her sense of loving. So I'm not at all surprised that Emma was Barbara's, as it were, first child.
I don't think that A Woman of Substance reflects very much to do with my own life. What I think it does is reflect my feelings about Yorkshire about the moors, about the landscape, about the people, all of the things the people are. I think there's a great deal of me in Emma.
More than just putting herself into Emma, Barbara put much of her life into the book, including naming Emma's brother Winston after her father and having him run away to the Navy in World War I, where he loses a leg. A miniseries of A Woman of Substance was produced, bringing the story of Emma Hart to television. The drama starred Deborah Carr, Liam Neeson, and Jenny Seagrove.
Tell me more about Leeds, Blackie.
Well, it's full of modern inventions. There were tram cars there, Emma. Amazing vehicles that run on tracks without the need of horses. Oh, there's wonders to see in Leeds, I tell you. I aim to make myself a pile one day and be a millionaire.
Can a girl like me make a fortune in Leeds?
I loved the movie. I started to cry when I saw Jenny playing little Emma running across the moors.
I didn't meet Barbara Taylor Bradford until we'd finished shooting, and I was terrified. Because this book is a wonderful book, and I was so anxious to have got it right for her sake. And this wonderful blonde lady walked straight up to me and gave me a hug, and she said, "Jenny, you are my Emma."
The 6-hour miniseries of A Woman of Substance would be watched by 35 million viewers and received 2 Emmy nominations.
Toast. A birthday toast to Grandmother. I'd like to drink to her continuing good health, for we all love her very dearly. Emma Hart, a great lady to whom we all owe so much.
While enjoying the success of A Woman of Substance and working long hours on her second novel, Voice of the Heart, Barbara was torn away from her work when her father fell ill.
I said to my uncle and my mother, "Should I come home? Are you telling me that this is a death-threatening situation?" And my mother said, "No, we just wanted you to know your dad is in hospital and he's fine." And then what happened is I got a call about 3 days later, and it was my uncle, and he said that my father had died.
Barbara returned to England to find her mother frail and distraught. Moreover, after her father's funeral, she had to perform one final task on his behalf. Her mother suggested that she take his aluminum artificial legs and donate them to the hospital.
It was like giving him away, and I just started to sob at the hospital. It was something that I can't really explain. It was the final wrench of giving the legs, and I realized then and accepted that he was dead.
After her father's death, Barbara returned to New York. Though she phoned her mother daily, she would be completely surprised by a phone call from England only 1 month later. This is an intimate portrait of Barbara Taylor Bradford. I'm Stephen Collins. Following the death of her father in 1981, Barbara Taylor Bradford could not persuade her mother to return with her to New York. For the next few weeks, Barbara called her mother nearly every day. It was only 5 weeks after her father's death that Barbara received a call informing her that her mother was now ill.
Her housekeeper, who was a friend, Brenda, called me in New York, and this lovely Yorkshire woman tells me, "Barbara, your mum is all right, but she hasn't been feeling well the last few days." So I said, "Can I speak to my mother? Bring her to the phone." So the phone goes down, I hear it clatter on the table, and I am waiting, and I'm waiting, and I'm waiting. And minutes go by, and then I start to call down the phone the woman's name. Finally, she's there. And she said, "Barbara, I don't know how to tell you this, but your mother just died."
While she was taking the phone over, the mother died in a chair. Incredible situation. And just closed her eyes.
And it was a funny thing because I absolutely believe that she died of a broken heart.
When she died, Mrs. Taylor was with her neighbor, Mrs. Coward, who told Barbara about her mother's final moments.
And she said, "Your mother leaned back in the chair. She never spoke. She closed her eyes. She said, I thought she was asleep for a moment, and then she opened her eyes again, and she looked right at me, and she said, 'You know, your mother has such blue eyes, but I've never seen them bluer.'" and she smiled. It was a smile on her face like I've never seen on anybody's face. And she said, I told Brenda, Mrs. Taylor saw something beautiful. And Brenda was there, and she said, Barbara, she saw Winston, she saw your father, and she knew you were safe with Bob. And I just wasn't there, and yet I was as close as I ever could be.
Her mother was a very sweet, wonderful lady. She educated her, she taught her, she was her guiding light. It's what Barbara is today is because what her mother gave her.
I think Barbara received 2 dreadful body blows with the loss of one parent after the other so rapidly in a short space of time. I think it was just terribly fortunate she had Bob.
Though she was left with an emotional void after the deaths of her parents, Barbara had to stifle her grief for the moment to finish her second novel, Voice of the Heart, which was later published in 1983. She and Bob waited anxiously to see if the public would welcome this new effort.
So the big question arose, what next? I mean, can she live up to the expectations and to all the build-up?
Voice of the Heart became a bestseller, proving to Barbara, her fans, and the publishing world that Barbara Taylor Bradford had the skill and talent to follow up the success of her first novel. Her husband Bob would produce the miniseries of Voice of the Heart, starring Victoria Tennant and Lindsay Wagner.
Why did you tell me Victor was the father of your baby?
Maggie, I loved you so much. I desperately needed your approval. I'm so sorry I did that to you. I'm asking you to forgive me.
Katie.
They were so wonderful, both Barbara and Robert. They couldn't have been more accommodating.
The success of Voice of the Heart catapulted Barbara to the ranks of the top-paid novelists, and she would soon command $3 million advances for her novels. Later, she would add another novel to the bestseller lists, the sequel to A Woman of Substance, Hold the Dream. I appeared in the miniseries with Jenny Seagrove, who this time played the granddaughter of Emma Hart.
What are you doing out here?
I came looking for you.
Yes?
Would you give me the ring Blackie gave to Emma? I'm not asking you for the ring simply as a gift, but as your future wife. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Shane.
Barbara would eventually take the time to face the grief of her parents' deaths and would use her writing as her outlet. Though fictionalized, Act of Will is nearly a biography of her parents that explores their passionate yet tumultuous life together in Yorkshire.
They really were at each other's throats or in each other's arms, and yet, although they quarreled a lot and were very confrontational with each other, they were very devoted to each other. No one could say anything about my father without my mother jumping down their throat.
Why don't we go upstairs for an hour?
We're not here.
Oh, I see. That's going to be the new excuse, is it? Well, I suppose it's better than being tired at the time of the month.
Keep your voice down.
Why don't you just tell the truth that you don't want me anymore?
Oh, don't be so silly.
Get more reaction from an iceberg!
I do want you. It's just... I'm so afraid of getting pregnant.
I was one day going through a lot of condolence letters, and I found one from my agent and friend and literary lawyer, Morton Janklow. And it's a letter that one of the letters of condolence that I've kept. And there was a sentence in it that said, "Your mother gave you the greatest gift a mother can ever give a child, and that is the desire to excel."
She must have been a quite extraordinary woman to have produced this independent-minded, hard-working, dedicated, disciplined daughter.
But if we had another baby, it would jeopardize Christina's chances.
For God's sake, woman, the child's not 2 years old and you're talking about a future already!
She won't have a future if I don't plan for it.
And I was extremely flattered that she had thought of me to play her mother, because perhaps, it's not for me to say, but perhaps this was something special to her out of all the books that she's written and all the characters that she's invented.
I think I needed to write Act of Will. I say think. I'm sure I needed to write Act of Will because it was, in a sense, a catharsis.
I think once she'd written it, she felt sort of lightened, liberated. I don't know. She would have loved to have her mother read it.
In 1988, Barbara would push the literary envelope to explore the devastation caused by the Nazis in World War II and how the Holocaust ripped apart the lives of European Jews. To write the women in his life, she would draw from the childhood experiences of her own husband.
I was born in Germany, in Berlin, and a good part of the early part of the book that she's written was based upon experiences which I had in my youth.
I went to Bob and I said, look, I'm thinking of writing a book about a businessman, a tycoon. I want to draw on part of your background as a child in Nazi Germany, and do you mind?
I mean, they are horrible memories, prefer not to think about it, but these were horrible days.
And you could say he had the Nazis right on his heels, but he did manage to get to Marseille in safety and was looked after there by friends of his cousins in Paris and also by the French underground, and eventually he ended up in Switzerland. So he had many a narrow escape, but he did escape, thankfully.
She never got the whole story because I have shut off that story, even my own story, because I don't want to think about it. It's a chapter in my life that I want to file away and not think about.
And he said, Barbara, I want to help you, but I really can't because I've buried it so deep. So deep that I can't dredge it up. And I knew that he meant it would be perhaps too painful.
Barbara opens the novel in Germany on November 9th, 1938, Kristallnacht, the night that German stormtroopers organized a nationwide shattering of Jewish shops and Jewish lives. She could never have predicted that while she was writing the book, the long-standing symbol of oppression in Germany, the Berlin Wall, would be torn down, giving her the perfect ending. Moreover, in miraculous coincidence, the Berlin Wall came down on the same date, November 9th, 1989, exactly 51 years to the day after Kristallnacht.
When the book came out, I was on the road, and a woman came to see me in a store in Ohio. And she said, when I got to the German part of the book, and when I read about Maximilian West being taken out of Germany on that train with his mother's jewelry sewn in his clothes, I just started to cry. And she said nobody was more surprised than me, because I've not cried for over 50 years, because I was taken out of Germany in the same way.
It's become a very emotionally packed, very dramatic kind of book. I think it's one of the best she's written, among the best, there's no question about it.
During the early 1990s, Barbara would continue pleasing her devoted fans with more novels, including Remember, Angel, and Dangerous to Know, every one a bestseller. Soon, she would receive her greatest honor and fulfill a deal she made with her parents 40 years earlier. I'm Stephen Collins. Welcome back to an intimate portrait of Barbara Taylor Bradford. Many of Barbara Taylor Bradford's books have been made as television miniseries and movies. Barbara's husband Bob produces the films. I appeared with Donna Mills in Remember, and other stars of the films include Sean Young and Jack Scalia, Melissa Gilbert, Victoria Principal, and Anthony Hopkins.
I've made 9 movies and miniseries of Barbara's books. Of course, she's written 15 books, and I'm a little bit behind because she delivers once a year. I can't keep up with her,
Barbara and Bob have formed both a loving marriage and an admirable business partnership.
There are very few couples who work together as much as they do. They're very close as a couple. They care deeply about each other. Their lives are totally involved with each other.
They're an incredible 1-2 punch. First of all, they're really in love with each other. It's a true love affair, and he does everything for her.
And I don't think I could have done it if he hadn't have been there, because whilst it's not a lonely job for me writing, because I have all these people going around in my head and all these ideas and visions and thoughts that I have to get out, at the same time it's solitary and you are alone. So at the end of the day, Bob is my reward. He was then and he is now. And I always say that he's my eyes on the world.
In 1988, the prestigious Brotherton Library at Leeds University in Barbara's hometown asked to be the caretaker of her original manuscripts, which are now housed next to those of her Yorkshire predecessors, Charlotte and Emily Bronte. 2 years later, in 1990, Barbara would accept an honorary doctorate of letters from Leeds University, and in 1995, the same honorary degree from the renowned Bradford University.
And I thought, my goodness me, wouldn't Mummy and Daddy be pleased finally I've made it to Leeds University? And I said to Bob afterwards at the reception, if only Mummy and Daddy could have been here, if they only knew. And he sort of looked up like that and he said, I think they know Barbara.
In 1992, Barbara struck an astounding deal that paid her an advance of $30 million for her next 3 books, Everything to Gain, Her Own Rules, and Power of a Woman. With great success and riches now hers, Barbara is still, nonetheless, a Yorkshire girl.
For all the wealth, for all the riches, and for all the fame, she is the most down-to-earth, ordinary lady that you could ever wish to meet.
Barbara Taylor Bradford ranks among the world's top novelists, but the not-so-secret ingredients to her success are simple hard work and a true feeling for a good story well told.
She gets up early in the morning and slogs away. She doesn't have to anymore, but she's just a compulsive worker.
Barbara is so prolific, and she was always working, at least during that time period, when those couple of years when I was working with them, that it was always, well, when is Barbara coming to this? Well, as soon as we can get her away from that desk.
She writes with tremendous understanding about women, about what women want, and about how women feel.
In 1999, Barbara's novel, A Sudden Change of Heart, reached the bestseller lists in its first week of publication. Barbara teamed with the March of Dimes to help raise money for charity while promoting the book.
It makes me very happy, and my husband Bob, that we can be part of the March of Dimes family. What a marvelous charity it is. What better thing there is to work for children.
15 novels carry the name of Barbara Taylor Bradford, but her fans can be sure that this prolific woman from Yorkshire has no intention of setting down her pen.
I suppose there are times when I stop and I think I can't believe that I've done that and that I've written all these words. But looking over there and seeing them, yes, I'm proud, and I'm proud of the books. I think the books are marvelous. They're entertaining, they're touching, they're moving. And I think I've given people a vision of life as I see it. I would be silly not to say I'm proud.
Barbara tends to be a little bit of a workaholic, and she called me once speaking kind of sotto voce from Acapulco, and she said to me, Bob doesn't know it, but I brought my typewriter with me. I can't sit here in the sun for 10 days.
The happiest moment for me in my life is when I start a new book, because every time I start a book, it's a new adventure. It's a test of my ability, my talent, my skill, my imagination, and I love it. I love writing more than going on the road or doing television. And if you took the writing away, I think I'd be half a person.